there are two columns. One that says indirect city actions and direct city actions. Basically what we've done is we've taken all the information that the City Council provided to us in February and also what the roundtable provided on January the 19th so that they can, so we can see what it is. There's some of the things that we've already started and some we've even completed. So one of the recommendations from the roundtable was to stop the panhandling in downtown. And we have developed and implemented a bylaw to regulate panhandling, and it has started to work, although there were a couple of people downtown today for a while. But overall, the amount of panhandling in the downtown core has dropped huge. Establish a policy for proactive bylaw enforcement. Up until this year, the bylaw officers only reacted to complaints. If there was not a complaint, they didn't go out to investigate it. What we've done now is we've changed their job responsibilities, and now it is up to them, just like a police officer, if they're traveling around and they see a violation of one of the city bylaws, they are to stop and react to it. That's a good thing. Enhance, I'm going to read these for you, so bear with me. Enhance the CCTV surveillance in key locations. These are all from the roundtable, by the way. The budget has been approved for 2019 so that we can do that. We need to put some more cameras in the park, some that will work in the nighttime with nighttime vision and a better quality so that we don't get, I described it the other day as ants eating bread, you know, the type of pictures. We want to have clear pictures so that the RCMP will be able to recognize what's going on. Promote crime prevention through environmental design and provide information to businesses and homeowners. We're starting to look at that. Implement a rebate program for purchase and installation of security cameras in private homes and businesses. We are going to look at that as a council. That should be coming up in the very near future. Improve lighting in the downtown core and investigate grant opportunities for enhancing public safety. Those are the recommendations that came from the roundtable participants. The city, the councillors, when we sat down and talked about it, we said promote citizen engagement and participation in block watch and citizens on patrol, encourage public live streaming cameras, and lobby senior levels of government through the UBCM and the FCM. Those are our different organizations that represent municipalities to enhance the criminal justice system by enacting stricter sentencing and punishments for repeat offenders. So, what we're looking for tonight from you, if you will, we have an hour to have this conversation. Remember, public safety isn't just necessarily police. If you have something for the fire department, for the bylaw officers, we're interested in hearing that. But what we're looking for are solutions to the problem. I mean, we all know what the problems are, so let's just see somewhere out in Parksville, maybe in this room, somebody has an idea that could help immensely, and they don't even know it yet. So we need to have the conversation so that we can find that solution. I would be more than interested to hear from the people. What we will do, we have a mic. If you would, we would love you to come to the front. Give us your name and your address, if you would, and tell us what you're thinking. I think it's important that we hear from you. Please, there's no dumb questions, there's no dumb answers. It's just, let's put it on the table and have the conversation. Okay, wait a minute, let's make sure we got you the right mic so that people can hear you. There we go.
Hi again, everyone. A few of you I saw this week at a joint meeting with the Chamber. we discussed briefly a little bit about public safety there as well, and one of the things that came up was response time of the RCMP in certain situations where the concern is undesirables in front of businesses downtown. I followed up with an email the next day to a few of you, not all of you. Essentially, I'd like to explore solutions for increasing the response time or the follow-through with open illegal drug use. And I think that together we can try to increase efficiencies on how those concerns are being addressed by being consistent in our follow-up, be that either through bylaw or through the RCMP. It was suggested that in cases where there is a concern that we contact law enforcement through the 911 emergency line. While that wasn't something I necessarily agreed with, it was something I was able to put into practice the very next day when we had somebody out front of our business in a drug-induced frenzy, chains around his neck, yelling profanities and obscenities. We had 2 strata council meetings that day, and we had a couple of people who chose to not come to the meeting because there was somebody in front of our building. I did call 911, and nobody showed up, and nobody followed up with a call. 911 was called at 12:32 p.m. To me, that's an issue, and I really hope to work together to come to a solution. If there's something that we can be communicating that assists in that becoming more efficient or ensures a response, I would love some input from the RCMP.
Two things. First off, I neglected to introduce Staff Sergeant Mark Pelche, who is the head of our police force here in the Oceanside area. Secondly, just if I could paraphrase what you're saying is that your solution is to improve upon this response time for 911 calls.
I'd like to get some input from the RCMP as to what can we as citizens be doing to increase the likelihood of a response. In practice, we generally call the non-emergency line. We spoke, you and I, and you mentioned that it would be more efficient and a better use of our services to call 911. Having done that and still receiving no response, I'm wondering if perhaps there's a way that we're communicating the issues that they're not being addressed. So what I'm hoping for from the RCMP is some guidance in how we can communicate the issues so that they're definitely followed up on. Is there something that we're saying that's not being taken seriously, or is it something that we're saying, for instance, one of the questions that I received when we called 911 was, does he have a weapon? My response to that was he has a large IV pole with wire on the end of it, and he has large chains wrapped around his neck. The question was, is it like a necklace? I said, no, it's large chain links around his neck. I didn't see if he had any other weapon, but when nobody showed up, I thought, well, maybe they didn't come because he didn't have a visible weapon. So I'm wondering if I could get input on how we can communicate things such that they're followed up on in a timely manner.
You may, please.
So first of all, I'm surprised that no one attended on a 911 call. That's the first I hear of it. What date was that?
Friday, May 3rd at 12:32 p.m.
12:30 at night?
12:32 p.m. in the afternoon, lunch. The call was made on speakerphone in the office lunchroom.
So those calls are directed up to our dispatch up in Courtenay.
Mm-hmm.
And then they broadcast
Dispatch
that down
to
here.
So when I called, they said police, fire, or ambulance. We said police, said for what town? Parksville. Then it rang through. After about 4 rings, another dispatch picked up and asked the same question, and then said, okay, how can I help? And that's when I explained the situation.
And no one showed up?
No one showed up.
What was that address?
141 Memorial Ave, downtown Parksville.
Okay, no, we'll look into that for sure. That guy was arrested today, just to let you know. He's in our cells right now. We know exactly who he is.
There's a million questions I want to ask, and I know that that's not why we're here.
Thank you.
Can I ask if there's plans for increased penalties for open drug use? For instance, if you roll up and there's somebody with a needle sticking out of their arm, because what I would like to see as a solution is more community service, putting these people to work, vests, cleaning up the beaches, cleaning up our community park benches, all of the things that we know are an issue. Is there a way that these people can be put to work in a community service aspect as part of their...
That's beyond the RCMP's control.
Let me
That's judicial.
let me address that if I could.
Sure.
First off, Staff Sergeant is absolutely right. It is beyond their control. It is also beyond the municipality's control. We have no say as to what penalties are awarded to criminals once they're convicted. It is done strictly by the court system. In the court system, Staff Sergeant and I were just talking before. How many times did you arrest the same guy? 6 times? Yeah, 6 times. One of his police officers broke an ankle in chasing him.
I saw that.
And at the end of the day, he ended up with 70 days for using a stolen credit card from a car that was broken into. And, you know, by the time you take off the 10 days that he sat in the jail, so that's 15 days off of it, and then you take all of the time off for good behavior, you're down to about 30 days that the gentleman's going to spend in jail. The risk-reward factor is way out of proportion as a deterrent for much of this. Anyways, that we all agree. There isn't anybody that sits at this table that doesn't believe that we need greater deterrence. We need them to do more for this. We think that this is an exceptionally important thing. It's just not happening, unfortunately.
So in line with your suggestion of enhancing stricter sentencing and punishments for repeat offenders, is there something that the public can do to also lobby alongside you to our higher levels of government?
That's a good question. And yes, you can contact your federal and your provincial MPs and MLAs and tell them that you want to have that done. They're the ones that make the rules. They're the ones that pass the laws that reflect in the sentencing. So will it work? I don't know, but at the end of the day. Anybody else have any comments? Councillor Chandler.
Yes, thank you through your mayor to Cassie.
Hi, Mark.
How are you?
Good.
Yeah, I agree. I think that anything we can do, we should all lobby the local government. We should be sending letters to Michelle Stilwell and other local MLAs. Definitely need to see all this stuff. I think sharing crime statistics with them and just making them understand that we really want things to change in our communities. And it kind of appears that everything's been downloaded in costs lately from the provincial and federal governments. So I think it's time for us to start pushing back on that and having them put more policing dollars together, allowing us to do a lot more things locally with some funding from them to stem this opioid crisis that's really gone out of control as far as the crime and things like that. So not to, talk about the skies falling or anything, but I think it's time to put more money into the specific issues at hand, and that's, with the rehab aspect of things, but also to police that side of it and make sure that we don't see open drug use. It's very dangerous to have needles laying around, and we don't want to see that in our community.
Question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Councillor Greer?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for coming. About 6 years ago, I made quite a long presentation to the UBCM, and I was hoping that they would support it. And I had a lot of solutions and same problems that we're having today about not enough teeth in the law and serving more time and working. And unfortunately, it was turned down. And I don't know whether it was turned down because everybody just didn't want to take that chance of being politically incorrect or whatever. I don't know. But We have presented that to the provincial government, and nothing has happened, really.
Are there currently programs in place whereby if there was a repeat offender sentenced to community work, where they would be able to go to work here in Parksville? Because I've never seen that type of work being done on the highways.
Well, John Howard Society, and I'm not familiar with it now, but I used to work through it because I was in the business. And I used to work through the John Howard Society, but I'm not sure where that is anymore, whether there is such a society, but they were quite active several years ago. Maybe the sergeant can tell me, are they still active?
John Howard Society is, but I've never seen them cleaning the highways or anything like that, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Mrs. Keller?
If I may, Your Worship, the only time that I've seen that happen in this community is through the Restorative Justice Program, and we've seen it more with youth. For example, we had a person who was caught doing donuts in the community park a few years ago, which doesn't sound very serious, but it's about $8,000 worth of damage that was done, and it was a young person who owned up to it right away. And so we felt that we could work with them to kind of teach them more about, what they should have not done. And that individual actually worked in one of the soup kitchens for about 12 weeks, and I believe they get about $10 an hour to contribute. So they have to work so many hours to pay off the amount. And we've done that a number of times, maybe 3 times that I can think of, where it's been a bylaw offense that's also criminal. But I believe, and maybe someone else might know the answer, but I believe the person has to agree to go that route. And I don't believe it works for like hardened crime. I think it's more the lower level where there isn't a personal injury.
Councillor O'Brien. Thank you.
If I may, through your worship, question to Staff Sergeant Mark Belache, and well, Cassie's still here on the same vein. In the incidents of open drug use on city public streets and so forth, is that an arrestable offense if it's called in, or what is your action from the RCMP when that is called in, is the first part of my question. And should that be called in on a 911 service number, or what happens? So just 2 questions, if you may.
So basically, all that is just possession of a narcotic. If he's using it or not using it, he has to be in possession of the narcotic. Is it a 911 call? If he's in the act and he's doing it right in front of you, sure, call 911. But like I say, if we've got accidents going on or break and enter in progress, we're attending that way before we go to a guy using drugs. So,
All right. Are there any other questions? Thank you. Any other questions, comments, solutions, which is what we're looking for? Name and address, please. The one that the little talking head. Yeah, we should.
Okay. My name's Rhonda McQuillan at 36 Trill Drive. And I have a question in regards to citizens on patrol. Now, with all the thefts, et cetera, happening in the community, various different conversations I've had with people in the public, I spoke with Corporal Foreman. There's a lot of people out there that have spoken about wishing to help with citizens on patrol, and then you hear the versus being a vigilante out there. Is there some way that we could do a collaborative approach with, say, the city, the council, RCMP, how we used to have the bike rodeos back in the day, but do it as a big event which would help to recruit people to have, to meet with Oceanside Safety and get more volunteers to be part of the Citizens on Patrol, because some people take it upon their own initiative and do it and contact the office. But I'm thinking if there's a big public event, people might be more inclined to think, hey, did you hear about this, and come down. So can we put something together? Being the RCMP's hands are very busy and tied already, but just as an assistance to help keep eyes and ears out on the street in an organized fashion.
Sounds like a reasonable idea, very good idea, actually. Anything to create awareness. Do we know how many Constable on Patrol volunteers we have?
Luckily, we have Mike Garland, who's in charge of that, so
Mike, I can't see you because of the glares back there, so I'm sorry. I didn't recognize you, or I would have pointed you out.
Your Worship, basically, Citizen Patrol, we have about 70 people that are trained to do patrols. And one of the criteria that we run into, unfortunately, is the ability to be working the same hours as those that are out on the streets. Oceanside Community Safety, in all, we have over 100 volunteers involved in various programs. The main idea of the Citizens on Patrol is that you're taught how to record information. You're taught the proper procedure in reporting to the police. We also ensure safety of the individuals by ensuring they are always in pairs when they do go out into the community. So the challenge we have is, yes, lots of people want to step up. The challenge is getting people that are willing to go out at 1 o'clock in the morning. The staff sergeant can probably provide a little bit more information, but a lot of crime is happening between the hours of 2 and 5, and not in the afternoon. That's the morning hours. So it does become a bit of a challenge to find folks that are not working the next morning at 8 o'clock to go in and do these patrols. So that is a challenge, and I would welcome the opportunity of putting on a fair to get more people involved. And to the same effect, to get people involved in block watch. And we actually use the analogy that block watch is really the building block of a community. And it's not just crime prevention, it's also public safety, which is why we work with EMO in promoting public safety. So Citizens on Patrol is basically block watch on wheels. So we want to get more people out there. We actually compensate volunteers with very minimal mileage, but it does help pay for some of the gas costs. So any opportunity to get out in front of the community and get the support of council would be wonderful. We always have support of the RCMP, and we're very grateful for the support and the partnership we have. So that would be a good step forward. Thank you.
Thank you. If I may, just a question, is that, just so I understand it clear, Citizens on Patrol, when you're out traveling, you're not confronting the people that are doing the crime. You observe, record, and contact the police. Would that be a fair statement?
Your Worship, through the chair, indeed. What we pride ourselves in being ears and eyes for the RCMP. We do not get involved in any situation. We report into dispatch before we start our patrols, and that message is sent out to all members on patrol for that particular watch, so they're aware where we are. And for instance, if there's an incident down in the news, we do not go toward the news. We actually go, this is probably not a good thing to say in the recorded conversation, but we go in the opposite direction. The bad guys see all the red lights and blue lights heading one direction. That's not the direction we go. We go the opposite direction. We want to make sure we're watching out and watching the backs of the members that are out there doing duties for us in the community.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for your service. It's so important to our community, especially right now. I can't say how much we appreciate it. Anybody else that would like to step up and give us some comments? I think with what we're going to be doing, just so it's not like we're ignoring any comments or whatever, they're being recorded. We're going to put it together as a package, and then we will start to work our way through all of the suggestions at that point in time. I see a gentleman here is very anxious to come out and talk to us.
Hi, thanks. Peter Simkin from Parksville. My regards is in the agenda that you mentioned, the fire department and their desire to increase staff. I worked in the ambulance paramedic for 30 years here in BC, and over the last 10 years was here in Parksville, mostly all in the island, and have realized, as some of the members of the council will attend to, that the amount of downloading onto our municipal fire department by our ambulance service, because we're so horribly understaffed. I've read recent articles in social media that we're 40 or 50 cars, ambulances down within the province. similar situation here when I worked here in town. So that, and Mark Chandler knows exactly, I'm talking to Adam Frost, that the amount of downloading that the ambulance service does to the municipally funded fire department. And I guess the only real solution to that is through things like UBCM and FCM that the council, as representatives of the city, put as much pressure on the Ministry of Health through the provincial government, however, to adequately staff ambulance services, not only here, but throughout the entire province, because the ambulance service funded provincially, downloading onto the municipality, if our, and I don't know how many medical calls we actually do in this city, but I know it's horrendous.
A lot.
How much pressure and how much are we funding the municipal system that we're already, or a provincial system that we're already funding? So I think, I'm not sure how much pressure can be put on or should be put on, but I think as much pressure as possible should be put on everywhere to ensure that ambulances are appropriately staffed.
Thank you. Those very valid comments. Anybody have anything? Councillor Chandler?
Through the chair to Peter Simkin. Thank you, Peter, for those comments. I think, ultimately, that's been going on with all areas with the downloading. There's also a lot of extreme pressure on fire departments and other municipality groups that the WC has got so involved with specialized training and all of the different things. It's really become cumbersome. And it seems like there's a huge expense that's also been attached to all this just to make sure that everybody's very safe. And I totally understand things are written in blood sometimes, unfortunately, with WCB, and there has been issues that have created this. But in so many ways, I think we just, we need to stop downloading all these things, these costs and this extra work, and do the business of looking after our own municipalities. I appreciate what you're saying about the ambulance. The ambulance is probably one of the most important services here, especially in this town with the number of seniors that seem to have cardiac arrests or issues with cardiac problems, lack of breathing, things like that. So I know as a department member for the fire department, we did a lot of calls based on that, and it was a lot of late cars coming in from Bowser and cars coming back from Nanaimo and things like that. So appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have asked, and we're going to be getting into it in the very near future with our staff. What happens is it's significantly cheaper for the province to rely on the fire department because they're not paying for that service instead of paying for the workers, the ambulance attendants, and so on. So what we need to be doing is going back to the province and just making one point. You either pay us what it's worth for us to do it, or you pay your own people to do it through the ambulance service, but it should be equal. So there's no upside for them to download to the municipalities. And that's really what we have to do. And we need to start getting on that campaign trail. It's getting bigger and bigger. The problem's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger, and we need to fix it. Your point's very, very well taken, Peter, and I appreciate you bringing it to our attention.
Thanks. One other issue that
Sure.
has come up on social media was finding more needles around town. In the park, and it's more a question or a suggestion, does the city staff patrol or sweep the park, for lack of better terms, before the gates open? Just out of curiosity. Somebody asked me that question. I didn't know the
Ms.
answer.
Keeler, would you like to answer that?
If I may, Your Worship, yes, we do. We focus our efforts in the community park and Foster Park. When you say before it opens, we usually have staff there at 7:30 in the morning. And all through the summer, we have summer students as well to supplement our work in the park. Our staff are all trained on how to pick up needles, but in some cases, we also have a contracted hazmat professional who we are calling more and more often. Our bylaw officers also do the same. They actually work very closely with the RCMP, and so when individuals are identified in a particular area, our officers tend to back up the RCMP and clean up after they've been moved along. So we do our very best to stay on top of it. I would say by sort of early morning, they're able to get through most of the community park and Foster Park, and then they move to other areas. The other thing that we do is we respond when we receive calls. So we do rely on the public to let us know. We have on-call staff on weekends, and we have a weekend bylaw officer also. But I think what's happening is sometimes we're not getting the call. Folks are perhaps going to social media, which we don't monitor. We don't know, if somebody's talking on a private group or talking even on like the PQB News or something, we don't always know. So we have information on our website about, who to call at what particular time, so whatever time of day or if it's, after hours. And we would definitely, just for the benefit of folks who are here and the press, request that people call us when they see something. And then that would supplement our active patrols to try and identify those situations as well.
So they actually call the city?
For the cleanup.
If they call the RCMP, is that forwarded to the city?
Depending what type of call, if it's just for cleanup, it shouldn't be the RCMP that's doing that. We
True.
do assist with bylaws, but
True, but I guess my question is, if somebody phones non-emergency number ideally and says, well, gee, we found a mountain of needles here, would that would be passed on to the city for cleanup?
sometimes, yeah.
Okay. Mrs. Keeler has a response to your
If I
question.
may, Your Worship, through you to all of council and the audience. So what we do is if we receive a call and it's only for public land, I might just let folks know that, we're not able to deal with private lands, but we do have information on our website as to how to deal with that and where you should bring those items. Basically, in this community, everything goes to Family Place, although our communications manager has put some additional information out there. We also are not responsible or permitted to clean up the beach. That is the provincial jurisdiction, so that's conservation officers, although many of our staff, if they see something, have actually taken that action, but we technically have zero jurisdiction on below the foreshore. It's the Parksville Wildlife Management Area, and it's the provincial government that is responsible for that. What we have happening quite often is kind of a dual situation where there's an individual where the RCMP tend to be there, and then our bylaw officers they work very closely together. I'd say every day our bylaw officers are there to clean up something that the police have been dealing with first. We also have all of our park staff and our outside workers, road staff and things like that will notify. They'll either deal with it if it's just one small item, but if it's a larger item, we contact our contractor and he comes and responds.
Are there sharps disposables, or like the containers available to the public through the city hall?
Go ahead, keep going. You're doing fine.
If I may, Your Worship, we have sharps disposals in all of our facilities. We do not provide them to other third parties, but I believe you can obtain mobile ones from the Ministry of Health. That's where we get them from Family Place also.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? No? All right. Thank you, Peter. But I'm not finished with the subject yet, so if you could. While we're on that subject of needles, I mean, we had an incident this week where people have populated the Facebook to pages and pages and pages of comments, and unfortunately, the city's getting blamed for not controlling what's going on. We have minimal, if any, control about what's going on. There are umpteen different reasons, but what I'd like to do at this point in time, if I may, is I'd like to propose a resolution. And the reason for the resolution, I'll explain myself before I give it, is that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of needles being given out by the various forms from all of the different health groups. They walk out and you say, could I get some needles? And the answer is yes. How many would you like? 50, 100, whatever. No responsibility for them. They just hand out the needles to the individuals. They all have their reasons why they do that, but they have to take some responsibility. If they're giving away that many needles, where do they expect them to end up? They're going to end up on the ground because there's no need to bring it back and trade it. There's no need to dispose of it carefully. They just throw them down on the ground, and this is what we're seeing. And I think that VHA and the other organizations that are giving away needles, although they're giving them away for maybe the right reasons, I think they're losing some of that when they start giving away hundreds of them at a time, 50 of them at a time, 20 of them at a time. They need to be more conservative on what they're giving out. And to me, we need to fix that. So what I'd like to do is to propose a resolution, and I'll read it for you. That staff be directed to report back to council on the legal procedure to prepare a bylaw regulating the unrestricted distribution of hypodermic needles to individuals in the city of Parksville, including a requirement that those individuals return used needles to the distributor for safe disposal before being provided with new needles. So what I'm saying is, if you come in and you want 2 needles, you bring in 2 needles and you give them back. That to me just seems like a lot of sense. I also am going to ask staff to add on to that just a little bit more, because damn it, I think it's a serious enough problem that they need to be looking at this. I would like to see the names of whose needles they are. So if it's VHA, their names are on the side of the needles. If it's whatever other group, their names are on the needles, so that when we start to get them back, we can see where they're coming from, who's giving them out. And if they're all from one group or another, then why wouldn't we go after the people that are giving them out? We have to start to clamp down on this, and this is the first step. So I'm making that motion. Seconded by Councillor Fraz. Any conversation? Councillor Fraz, please. I think it's an important conversation to have.
I think this is a great motion coming forward here, and out of that, I hope that we can identify who are distributing needles in our community. I know that there are some that get distributed out on our city property across Jensen at times, and so I guess I have a question of staff, if we'd be able to identify or figure out how many different groups are handing out needles in our community. And perhaps a conversation at some point can go towards too, when we talk about maybe identifying who these needles are, if they're open to switching to the vanishing point needles so that the harm reduction can become a harm elimination. I don't see any good reason why, when they're handing them out in unlimited quantities, I don't believe cost to be a factor to switch toward vanishing point needles, or the size of the needles, that they can't have a different gauge of needle on there. That would eliminate having needles hanging out of people's arms. Once they're used, they retract back into the base. These needles are handed out. They're used for Narcan kits. They're used by the paramedics. We have them in our community, but they're not the ones that are being handed out. If those needles are found on the ground, there's no harm to anybody, and it's also safer for the users because they cannot share needles after they've been used. So I'd like to see, hopefully out of this motion, we can start working towards that direction as well. So I definitely support this. Thank you.
We are pushing the envelope on this resolution, by the way, but I think it's important. Councillor O'Brien.
I would just like to, through the chair, reiterate Councillor Fraz's intended resolution addition to it to go to the retractable needles, because they are available. And I was told at the past one, I asked why the VHA in particular weren't using the retractable needles. They said it was all a matter of cost, that they were a little bit cheaper, or the retractable needles were a little more expensive than the other ones, which I thought was rather unacceptable considering all the risk has been pointed out. So I would like to see amended that resolution for staff to look into, of having any of the distributors, once they're identified, to switch over immediately to the vanishing point or retractable needle system. It is not only just for the public safety, it's also for the users as well, as Councillor Fraz pointed out, the various advantages. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greer. Oh, sorry. Mrs. Keeler.
Sorry, Worship, just a point of clarification for the minutes.
Yes.
Did
I confuse it?
No, no, you didn't. Are we correct, though, that Councillor Fraz is amending your motion to add the retractable needles as an addition to your motion?
I'm not looking to amend it at this point. I'd like to just carry forward his motion, but just saying that I think that's where the conversation can lead to there. And just out of interest too, and for the citizens here as well, I had gone to an outreach worker that was on our Jensen property this last year to see that kind of process they have with hand needles, and I asked them, can I have some needles? And the response to me was, how many can you take? I was offered a box full of them. When I turned down a box because I didn't have any way to carry them, they said, can you take 100 of them? And I said, well, what am I going to carry them in? They, at that point, then gave me a Sharps container, which then they packed completely full to the point there would be no way to use those needles and return them into the container. And that's what it was sent away with. That was a shocking experience to see that's how they were distributed in our community. So hopefully these kind of changes can be made and change.
Councillor Greer, and then Councillor O'Brien, Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I have nothing further on that motion, but I certainly support it.
Thank you. Councillor Chandler?
Thank you, Worship. I also wanted to just add, nothing in the way of an amendment, but I wanted to add that I think the responsibility also falls a little bit squarely on everybody, the community, but also the groups that are helping, the SOS, for an example, anybody that's handing out things or meals or interacting with any of the folks that are out in the community that need our help. We are helping these folks with lots of handouts and food and so on and so forth, and I think we've got a hugely compassionate society here in Parksville itself. But I think the one thing that there's a lot of disrespect being thrown back where I think these organizations like the Salvation Army and the SOS, they need to speak to the people that are coming into their buildings for lunches and things like that and say, hey, you guys and ladies, we need to start policing ourselves out there. We need to pick up our own stuff. We can't leave stuff sitting on picnic tables. We have kids and we have families and people arriving into our town that have never been here before, and I think it's incumbent on anybody that's out there helping, which we all try to do, to make sure people know that it's a two-way street. If we are going to help people, we need their help in showing us that joint respect. So that's a comment I just wanted to make. Thank you.
Okay. Just while I'll be right with you, I'm trying to get everybody at once, and then you can come in the second time.
Thank you, through your worship. I would like to see if I can make an amendment to the mayor's motion that all Sharps be retractable, if that's possible. It's not possible.
If I may, Your Worship, the motion at the moment doesn't include discussion of the retractable needles. However, when staff comes back with the report, I've just made a note of the topics or the themes that council wants to hear about. So in my opinion, I don't think we need an amendment to the motion. We've certainly captured the essence, but I'll leave it to the mover and seconder to confirm.
Thank you. Thank you for the attempt. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you through the chair to Mrs. Kaler. Just a clarification, I was actually proposing an amendment to that resolution, just whereby as if we're having the conversation with the suppliers of the needles, that at the same time as the staff has that conversation, I think if we're already conducting that conversation, just ask about the possibility and the reasons for and against of why the vanishing point needles are not handed out. It seems like if we're already at the table, then we should be putting that conversation to them, and then when staff comes back with the report to council, then we can deal with it and not have to go back a second time and then delay action even further. That was only my question, or only my proposal for the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question now, and we'll go from there. Are you guys ready? We're going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? I would think that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much for your support. We'll take that applause. Thank you very much. All right. Anybody else? There was a lady. I'm sorry, I interrupted you because I wanted to carry on with the needle conversation before we got sidetracked. So please, come in.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Your Honor and the councillors for making this forum possible. My name is Lori Rankin. I live at 748 Foster Drive. I've lived in the area, lived and worked and shopped in the area since 1974. But this will be my 5th year as a resident of Parksville. I've lived in Arrington and Columbia Beach. The only reason I'm saying this is I have a slightly different topic of public safety. 6 years ago, my partner and I got a rescue dog, and because I'm retired, I have the luxury of walking her almost every day of the week. And my concern is about the number of people, and it's often people my age, driving big SUVs who do not follow the speed limits. And as far as safety goes, I feel much safer in downtown Parksville coming out of Thrifty Foods at 9:59 than I do walking around my subdivision. And I walk into town sometimes right to the beach. I walk up into Columbia Beach with the dog. But in particular, on Sanderson, there's a sign that's 30 kilometers. It's a playground, so you're supposed to do 30. And the number of people I've seen like zipping down there, and I've watched when there's picnics going on, mothers like lifting their toddlers out of their cars, which are parked into Foster Park, and the people just zipping by at 40, 50 kilometers. And sometimes if I'm just crossing the street and walking the dog and I see somebody come in, they're obviously not going 30, they're going 40 or 50. I stand beside the sign, or I go like this, I can do it backwards, 30, 30, right? Because my kids are grown, but these are other people's kids. And it's happening all over town, people jumping the stop signs. And what can we do? There were some citizens on patrol who were along Foster Park at one point, and they were clocking people. They're not empowered to do anything. But I think it is a public safety concern. And the other day I was turning left off Corefield onto the Island Highway, and now they have the protected light. And there was a man, and he could barely walk, so he was hobbling across the street with the walk sign. And the woman behind me was laying on her horn because I wasn't going. Well, I was going to go through the crosswalk and hit the man, and we did get through, but there's some very aggressive drivers in our community, and they are local people. It's not out-of-towners or homeless people. They're disrespectful, and I don't know as testosterone and estrogen decline if people get more aggressive, but many of these are older people driving big, powerful vehicles. And as far as I'm concerned, a vehicle is a weapon. So I feel more unsafe walking my dog on Temple Road or Sanderson than I do in downtown Parksville.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure the powers to be have heard that comment, so we'll go from there. Thank you. Yes, go ahead. Councillor Fraz?
Just have a question to staff through the mayor. I noticed on Bagshaw, for example, when they put in the Jensen Greenway Trail, there's a speed hump along the road there now, and it seems to be pretty successful in calming traffic. Is there any objection to, or what kind of obstacles do we have in putting things like that out by Foster Park? So if there are 30-kilometer speed zones near parks, to have a few speed humps along that road?
Or some type of traffic calming measures.
Yeah, traffic calming too, but I found speed humps, like that one, it seems to be pretty successful.
If I may, Your Worship, I don't know, I'm not the engineering expert, but I know we do have a process where if someone complains about a particular area, we investigate, and the engineering department can track, by putting things on the road, they can track the speed. I know one of the concerns I've heard about the speed bumps is that it does slow response time for emergency vehicles. But we can certainly ask the engineering department to look specifically at Foster Park, I guess, just the area around there. I believe this has come up in the past, so if council agrees, perhaps I could take Councillor Fraz's comments as the beginnings of a motion to direct staff to look into that. If that's okay.
I think that would be appreciated, just to.
I think you received your complaint so that we could
Yeah.
start the process.
Yeah, so if I can get a seconder for that, we can certainly initiate that as soon as
Councillor
engineering has
Wilson.
time.
Councillor O'Brien, do you have a comment?
If I may, through your worship, to the last speaker, thank you very much. And your comment is very valid about public safety. This is a very real problem, and it's happened. I walked down Foster today, anyways, right past the park, and I know exactly what you're speaking of. So the thing is that just to let you know that this council has, since we've had our regular budgetary meetings and so forth, very much in response to your concern is the idea of traffic slowdown. Not just around Foster Park, but traffic slowdown period in Parksville. And by doing that, by like enhancing crosswalks, more pedestrian crosswalks and so forth that are pedestrian controlled, that's going to generally slow down the traffic. And you know, what's going to happen, it's going to piss off a lot of those aggressive people. And I hope if they really have to go somewhere in a hurry, they take the freeway and go down and bypass it if they're trying to get through Parksville into Nanaimo. We really hope that that happens. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make Parksville the destination. So the destination will be here. So it's just not a drive-through anymore, but drive slowly and cautiously, because the people of our community are very important to us. So we've had numerous conversations, and with engineering as well. So we're looking at a myriad of proposals to do that. So we're on your side here, but trying to slow down the traffic. We're working for it, but thank you very much for your observations.
Sorry, go ahead, you can ask the question. We'll be to you in just a second.
My apologies, because I'm not sure if the question had been asked or anything. In past discussions that I had with some residents and other communities, and that is that you get really busy on some of the streets and you don't see the posted sign of what the speed limit is. So there was a suggestion of having it on the actual street, of having some really bold lettering where it says like 50 kilometers an hour, and you know, some of the school zones and everything, where people who aren't familiar maybe with the community know that there's a school coming up, so then it's at a 30 or one of those community parks and everything too, because like I said, when you're whizzing by, especially on the interior highway, you sometimes miss what the speed limits are, and you're thinking that they're 60 or whatever if you're coming from another municipality.
Thanks, thank you. At last. Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. My apologies. I forgot that was a motion. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you. Sorry. Now.
Hello. My name is Rebecca Sharp, 1288 Fair Road. I just have a quick question about possibly loosening the rules on what a nuisance property is considered. We recently had a drug house move in across the street from us, and I had them removed within 3 weeks. Thankfully with the police, the help of the police and suggestions from them, and also the neighbors were very aware of what was happening. We were taking pictures and whatnot, and fortunately they didn't have a proper rental agreement in place, or any rental agreement. They were squatting on the property, and that's how we were able to have them removed. So, is there any way that it can be adjusted that known drug houses, it was a known drug dealer who was living on the property in a fifth wheel with a curfew. Is there any way to have the rules changed to make it easier for people who identify these drug houses in their neighborhoods to have them more easily taken care of? Because if they had a rental agreement in place, it would have taken us months to have these people removed from that property.
Would you like to answer? Or do you want me to? It's up to you. No, go ahead. Go. The problem is nuisance, what's classified as nuisance housing is not it's not ours. It's the province's rulings, isn't it?
If I may jump in, Your Worship?
You may.
We do have a nuisance bylaw.
Yes.
And so what happens when, and again, we work very closely in the bylaw department with the RCMP on this particular item. So we have had a number, I'd say 2 in the last few months, declared as nuisances. And what happens is then every time the police, the bylaw officers, or the fire department attend, we bill the owner. So usually what happens is once we've had a number of complaints and a number of attendance at the property by either police or our bylaw officers, we bring a report to council outlining that we think we're at the point where this should be declared a nuisance. Council declares it a nuisance, and then we are, from that day, I believe we have 30 days where the person has the right or the ability to clean it up. And if after 31 days we attend again, then they get billed. And just as an example, one of the recent bills where somebody, several of our people had to attend, it was almost $1,000. So that tends to get people to react pretty quickly and take action to clean up and deal with the problem.
The part that you were speaking to, and that's what I was going to address, is it's under the Landlord and Tenants Act, and unfortunately, it takes an act of God sometimes to have them change.
Yeah,
and
we just got
somebody.
really lucky.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, but the province has to change that.
Okay.
And, okay, we can't, what we can do is lean on them, and you know, our detachment here is amazingly good.
Oh, they
and
were
efficient.
awesome. Yeah,
and
very
they're efficient
responsive
as anything to handle it. So let's hope that if we run into it again, and we will run into it again, that we can have the same results.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. We're now into overtime. Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to bring up something, and I'd like to actually put a motion together after just speaking about this if I could, but I did some research over the last little bit and have had some conversations with various people. Just over the last little bit, there's been a fairly large spike in crime. I'm talking about statistics right now on over and above what we were presented by Staff Sergeant Peltier. But this is just from the, I think the Oceanside Safety website when we went on there and had a look at it. It was April 14 to 20th. There's 322 calls for service for the RCMP, not specifically broken down as to what, but essentially their normal kind of average number would be around 200 a week, I would think, which is really actually quite high. And that's gone up since the last couple of years too as well, if I'm not mistaken. And then the following week right after that, April 21 to 27, there was 297 calls for service at that point. So not getting in the way of what Staff Sergeant Peltier would normally do, but I guess what I'd like to do is I'd like to present a motion in looking at the auxiliary officers here locally as a peace officer status rather than as an auxiliary status. So peace officer status being the status that's managed by the province of British Columbia in putting some sort of special group together that can do bicycle policing, have their own vehicles, have downtown patrols in a kind of a status to deal with things that are spiked right now. We're in a bit of, I'm not going to say a crisis, but we're in a situation where we have a lot of very concerned citizens. We've got a lot of theft going on. You know, it's some transient theft from people driving through. They live in Campbell River. They come and steal from us here and they take off. We've got lots of door handles being opened up and stuff's being stolen, which is partly because we're leaving our cars open. But at the end of the day, I guess the motion I'd like to make is I'd like to direct staff to present a report and speak to the RCMP about the possibility of having our auxiliary officers, who we have, I believe, 8 of them trained here in this city, fully trained, ready to do most everything. And we're very proud of them, the time they've put in and efforts that they've put into the community up to this point. There's no cost to us at this point with them, and I think this would be an amazing opportunity to bring them into the fold and help with the amount of calls right now. It's a ridiculous amount of calls. So I don't know if that's probably one of the longest motions we've ever seen, but
it certainly seemed that
yes,
way.
thank you.
Did you paraphrase it a bit?
If I may, Your Worship, Through you to Councillor Chandler, just to confirm I've captured the essence of his motion. What we're hearing is that Council would like to direct staff to work with the RCMP to investigate having auxiliary RCMP members declared as peace officers, which would enable them to do proactive bicycle policing, independent patrols in vehicles in the downtown to deal with the spike in crime.
Is that your motion?
That is the motion. I guess in a sense, I'd like to add that potentially if it's a problem with the province to have them as auxiliary, if we could badge them over with a BC Peace Officer badge, is that potentially something we could look at too? So, thank you.
Seconded by Councillor Greer. Discussion. Fine.
Just a quick question for Staff Sergeant Pelletier. With these increase in calls of service, just any calls of service, do we map out the locations of where they're happening so we can see trends or hotspots in the community as to types, if there's,
Yeah, every file is recorded, so they'll always have an address, but we don't have an analyst that goes, okay, there was 56 calls at this address here, and we'll pinpoint it on the map. We just don't have that person here in Parksville Oceanside area. They do have that in the bigger centers, the Oceanside, Nanaimos, or the Kelownas of the world, so.
and that's why I'd asked. I saw in Nanaimo, for example, they had them on a map so they could see where car break and enters were happening, or those types of things, thefts, or, so, thanks.
Any other comments, questions? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? All right, so we'll see a report, and then we can fight that through. You have a comment?
What other safety concern?
We're now into, it has to be really quick because we're now in overtime.
Traffic concern regarding the entrance to the parking lot behind CIBC. You're making a turn left from the Island Highway onto the Alberta Highway, and the entrance to the CIBC parking lot is right in
Yep.
the intersection. Isn't it the solution, gas for solutions? Do we close that and open an entrance to that parking lot on side street? Simple solution to a problem. I see pedestrians getting into trouble, traffic backs up into the intersection. It's a bit of a thing, but I think that's a very simple solution.
I always thought that was a driver's test thing to see if you could make that move without getting clobbered. It's an engineered thing. Those are both municipal roadways, so it would be our engineering department. We could ask the question of our engineer. Yeah, yeah. We get to do that, though. Pardon?
Thanks.
Thank you.
Is that quick?
Yep. We could just ask the engineer to look at it, okay, if we need to follow it from there. All right. We're 7 minutes over, which is usually pretty good for me. So thank you very much for your attendance. Thanks for the great input that we received tonight. This is far from over. We're going to be putting all of the thoughts together and come up with a very focused plan on what we can do and how we're going to do it. We're going to be doing that. When's it all coming together? At the end of July. So we're working towards the end of July for our total 5-point focus. We're going to be doing these meetings now just about every week. Yeah, there's 4 left, right? And 3 left. We're going to be doing those just about every week now so that we can go. Some of them might be more interesting, some might be less, but they're all equally as important. So thank you very, very much. And we're having our council meeting at 6 o'clock, so we'll see you then. Yes, we need a motion to adjourn. Okay. Councillor Fraz, second by Councillor Greer. All those in favor? We're adjourned. Thank you.